Hello, fellow cyborgs, and welcome to my August reading wrap-up, where I will talk to you about most of the books that I read in August. I will be discussing the rest of the books I read in August in either preceding or upcoming videos, so check out all of my videos to see all of my reading. I participated in Avatar: The Last Page Turner Readathon, and for that I finished 4 books that I'm going to talk about here. There by Tommy Orange I gave 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed how this broadened my knowledge of Indigenous life, specifically in Oakland, California, but otherwise just in America. I really enjoyed Orange's writing style and his ability to craft characters, though the ending was a bit too up in the air for me and I don't really know exactly what I was supposed to think. But this just solidified in my mind that I do need to research and read more from Indigenous people. I gave Small Island by Andrea Levy 4 out of 5 stars. This is a historical fiction novel whose spine is very stiff, and I ended up having to crease the spine so that I could physically read it without pain. Most of the action takes place during World War II and how that interacted with the 4 main characters' lives in here. And so for that reason, at times this felt slow because we start the book out past World War II in 1948, and that timeline doesn't progress very much into the future. However, I really enjoyed Levy's writing style and also her characterization. It was also really interesting for me to learn about racism in England rather than just racism in America. I really enjoyed this though and definitely want to read more by this author. I gave Full Cicada Moon by Marilyn Hilton 2 stars. This is written in verse and I don't think it's justified. I didn't find it poetic in the least, and it seemed more like this was written in paragraphs and then reformatted into verse for kicks. Our main character in this is Mimi, who is half Japanese and half black, but only her Japanese heritage is explored. Again, this is justified within the novel, but I found it questionable that the only aspect of Mimi's blackness is that they eat collard greens and cornbread. There was also this moment where white people were having a hard time processing a racist situation that Mimi went through, and Mimi decides that she has to forgive these white people for taking baby steps forward in their journey to being more understanding. And I thought that the idea that it's Mimi's job to make the white people feel comfortable was incredibly harmful. So 2 out of 5 stars. I did not enjoy this, unfortunately. And then I DNF'd Happiness Like Water by Chinelo Okparanta with a 2-star rating. I read 6 out of these 10 stories, and even though the stories, if I described to you what happened in them or what they were about, sounds interesting on paper, something about this made me completely not connect with the characters emotionally. So because of that, I felt very indifferent about all of the 6 stories that I read, which was about 100 pages in this collection, and I could have pushed myself to finish the last 4 stories, but I really just didn't want to. So I ended up DNFing this, and I am disappointed that I didn't get on with it. Another huge disappointment is Axiom Zen by Lindsay Ellis. I pre-ordered this because I so admire Lindsay Ellis's video essays here on YouTube, but this was such a disappointment. To put it as kindly as I can, I don't think that this was edited well enough. I don't think that the writing style was edited well enough, nor the plotting and pacing. Most of the side characters were superfluous, even though we spent time learning about them, even though it came to no end. The only interesting thing about Axiom's End is the alien species that Ellis created, which seemed like the thing that she took most care in doing. But for me, the concept of an alien cannot hold up the entire weight of a novel. And that alien's relationship with our main character Cora got uncomfortable, to say the least. So this definitely does not live up to the caliber of Lindsay Ellis's other work that I have enjoyed, and I'm really disappointed, and I actually feel a little bit duped. The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, however, did not dupe me at all. I listened to this on audiobook, which is narrated by the author, and I loved this. This was so excellent. It was such a fast read, and I think part of that is because I don't think it's very long and it is written in verse, but hearing Acevedo read her own prose is the only way I would recommend experiencing the Poet X. I really loved hearing about X's experience in finding herself and finding slam poetry. I will definitely be listening to more of Acevedo's audiobooks. I also listened to Redefining Realness by Janet Mock. This is her autobiography, and I think the hype got to me on this one a little bit. I ended up enjoying this at about a 3-star level, though I did find the information in here about the trans experience, or specifically Mock's trans experience, to be really enlightening. It was really heartbreaking to hear about all of the struggle and all of the grit and grime that she had to go through to be the place where she is now, and I think maybe that's part of it as well. It's definitely not a happy read at all all. It's not very uplifting until the very end when things start working out, and just having to be in that headspace in that world was pretty dark. But if you're interested in hearing more about the trans experience and you don't know very much at all, I would recommend this. I think this would be a good place to start. So I gave Redefining Realness 3 stars. I buddy read The Girl in the Tower with M.A. Anders, and this is the second book in the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars, though my experience with it was very split. The first half, where there's not a lot of cheerty, there's not a lot of magic, I found to be at probably a 2-star enjoyment level, but then in the second half of this book, where magic is more present and the plot gets moving and there are stakes and there's action, I enjoyed more at a 4-star level. So I wish that this had felt more cohesive. However, the second half I did really enjoy, and it really makes me excited to pick up the third and final book in this trilogy. This is The Adventures of the Princess and Mr. Whiffle, The Thing Beneath the Bed by Patrick Rothfuss, illustrated by Nate Taylor. I can't remember if I first rated this 3 or 4 stars, but upon rereading it, I rated it 2. The idea of this is that we have a quintessential princess, and then slowly as the story progresses, we learn that things are not all as they seem. However, upon rereading, I thought that the world building just really wasn't there or fully developed, and I didn't understand the situation that the princess was in, to the detriment of the story, I think. So I ended up giving this 2 out of 5 stars. I also read the sequel, which is The Dark of Deep Below, also by Rothfuss and Taylor. This I enjoyed a little bit more than the first, actually. The world building is far more developed. We understand that the princess is trapped with her father and mother, both who are kind of wicked seeming people, and we learn more about the world that she's in as well, which includes the deep below. So I enjoyed the world building of this far more. I thought it made the story a lot richer, and so I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. So those are all the adult books that I'm going to talk about today, but I have a huge stack of children's picture books to talk to you about if you're interested. I saw Ash from Bookish Realms' video on Black mermaids, and it really motivated me to pick up some children's books with black mermaids in them. She highly recommended Suki and the Mermaid, which I remember reading as a child. However, I don't remember particularly liking it as a child, and I decided to try it again. This is by Robert de Saint-Souci and illustrated by Brian Pinkney. This is the story of Suki, who's being abused by her parents, and she ends up befriending a mermaid who helps her through her life. Though very unusual, I did enjoy the illustration style, which is very scratchy art sort of look, and I really enjoyed the power that this mermaid had and the happy ending that Suki gets. I checked on Goodreads, and I think I had read this like 4 or 5 years ago and gave it a 4 out of 5 star rating. I don't remember that happening at all, but this time when I read it, I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and I want my own copy. Ash from Bookish Realm linked a list of Black Mermaid books, and this was on it, so I decided to pick it up. This is The Mermaid's Twin Sister, More Stories from Trinidad by Lynn Joseph and illustrated by Donna Perrone. So this is a collection of stories from Trinidad, and in here, one of the stories has to deal with a mermaid. Each story gets its own single black and white drawing like this, which definitely isn't my favorite illustration style or illustration to text ratio, but I think that it ended up working pretty well. There is a frame narrative here where Amber and her cousins are hearing these stories from Tonti. So technically this is a sequel, and it does kind of feel like a sequel, but in no way did that deprive my enjoying of these stories. I was really impressed with these. These included stories that I've never heard before, stories to caution children of things different than I have ever heard a fairy tale caution children with before. And there's also at the end of this volume a story of how the national dish of Trinidad was created, and I felt that I, through this children's book, had a really foundational appreciation for Trinidadian culture. So because I enjoyed this so much and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars and I will be keeping it, I picked up the first in the series. This is A Wave in Her Pocket, also by Lynn Joseph, but this is illustrated by Brian Pinkney, who did Suki and the Mermaid. Similarly, before, these illustrations are 1 per story, but with the scratchy sort of Pinkney style. And I enjoyed these stories as well. I liked how some of them were really spooky and some were really heartfelt, and we got a better idea of who Tonti is and why she's so important to the family. However, I think I enjoyed The Mermaid's Twin Sister just a little bit more, but I really enjoyed both of these, and I gave A Wave in Her Pocket 4 out of 5 stars as well. I read The Secret Shortcut by Mark Teague. This is about 2 friends that keep showing up to school late, and it's because the secret shortcuts that they take aren't very short at all. I really enjoyed the writing style, and I also really enjoyed that one of the main characters was a person of color. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I will be keeping it on my shelves. I gave It Takes a Village by Jane Cohen Fletcher 4 out of 5 stars. This is the story about a girl who is learning responsibility, specifically responsibility over her brother, but it's also about the It Takes a Village proverb and really showing how a village helps raise a child. I really enjoyed how the illustrations added flavor and explored the Benin culture a little bit, as this is supposed to kind of be based on that culture, and I probably said the country's name wrong. So overall, this did what it set out to do, and I found it really endearing. The idea of having personal responsibility as a village, and then also learning to value your village and thank them for the work that they do. This is Just Another Ordinary Day by Rod Clement, and I remember this from my childhood because the main character is named Amanda, and that normally doesn't happen in stories. These illustration styles are very strange and a little off-putting, but I remember this from my childhood and I still kind of enjoy it. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars and I will be keeping it. This is Bridges Are to Cross by Philemon Sturgis, illustrated by Giles LaRoche. This is a really interesting nonfiction book about bridges, and LaRoche's illustration style is paper cut art, and it's really intricate and so interesting to look at. You get a pretty big spread of the bridge, and then you also get this small bit of text where it talks about the bridge you're looking at and a little bit about the ingenuity or the times that caused this bridge to be made. The bridges are from all over the world, and even though the text really pales in comparison to the illustrations, I found it to have just enough information for this to be a fun nonfiction for a child. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, and I will be keeping it. This is Strega Nona Takes a Vacation by Tomie dePaola. This is number 9 in the Strega Nona series, which I have not read, and I don't know particularly why we had this book, but I actually really enjoyed the illustration style, and specifically the fact that a lot of the story takes place through illustration alone. It was also super chill to be with Strega Nona while she finally takes her vacation, because she's a hardworking woman who needs to take care of herself. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, and I will be keeping it. And I would also be interested in reading more Strega Nona stories. This is Earth Mother by Ellen Jackson with illustrations by Leo and Diane Dillon. I went on a Leo and Diane Dillon kick, borrowed a bunch of books they illustrated from the library because they are my favorite illustrators. So this is the story of Earth Mother, and at first it seems like it's kind of pointless and we're just following Earth Mother around the earth. But then over time we realize that there's a kind of fairy tale in here going on. And it's about how man is really annoyed by the mosquitoes and wish there were less, but he really likes the frogs because they're tasty. And then Mother Earth talks to the frogs, who asks for more mosquitoes because they're great, but less men because they're annoying. And then she talks to the mosquito, who says, I really love those men folk, they're super tasty, but also those frogs are awful and could you get rid of them? I also really enjoyed how her cloak that she wears changes seamlessly as if it's blending in with the environment or reacting to the environment, and also how these botanical details transcend the illustration boxes. I really enjoyed this, gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I do want to buy my own copy. And then I read The Secret River by Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, which is also illustrated by the Dillons, and I quite enjoyed this one as well. It's about a young girl who's living in Florida in a community that's not very prosperous, and they're on hard times, and she ends up finding out that there's a secret river in which she can catch catfish, which will help her father sell them. At the heart of this, it's talking about how a community needs to work together, and the illustrations are really beautiful. Every single one of them. So I think if I didn't care how many children's picture books I owned, which I kind of do, I would want to own this myself because I did give it 4 out of 5 stars. But I think for now, I would be happy to know that this is at my local library. This is Jazz on a Saturday Night by Leo and Diane Dillon. They wrote the text as well as illustrated the book. And this is about famous jazz icons and jazz itself. I really enjoyed how the text had a rhythm which kind of evoked the jazz that you are supposed to be experiencing. And they even included at the end, well, there's supposed to be a CD included, but they included a list of their favorite songs by the different jazz musicians who are described in here, as well as some biographical information of the people they talk about. But for me, overall, these illustrations weren't quite what I love about their illustrations. So I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars, and I will be checking out the jazz music recommendations at the back of the book. This is The Goblin and the Empty Chair by Mem Fox, illustrated by the Dillons, and this is a story of a goblin who realizes that he's hideous, and so he then goes out and does random acts of kindness for strangers, and then at the end the family takes him in and he takes off his mask and everything's fine. I thought it was really weird. I did not love the illustrations, nor did I enjoy the lack of a backstory to justify why the goblin's hideousness is a character flaw that he needs to overcome. I thought it was upholding beauty standards and not upholding self-esteem standards and self-confidence standards, and conflating the idea of ugliness with badness rather than your physical appearance having nothing to do with what kind of a person you are, and therefore you don't have to do nice things and charitable works to prove that you're worth it. So I found the message in here just not very great, and I didn't particularly like these illustrations specifically. So I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Girl Who Spun Gold by Virginia Hamilton, illustrated by the Dillons. This is a West Indian little man fairy tale. The most famous of the little man fairy tales is Rumpelstiltskin, I can say his name, Rumpelstiltskin. But the cool thing is that not only are these illustrations absolutely glorious and also show very Black people, which I know is an issue with colorism that still happens today, but also the miller's daughter figure, the princess figure in here, actually is pretty badass and has some agency as opposed to the miller's daughter in Rumpelstiltskin. But the Little Man fairy tale is not one of my favorites, and the little man that the Dillons decided to illustrate is just like very visually off-putting. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I'm glad I read it, but I don't need to own it. And then finally we have Her Stories, African American Folk Tales, Fairy Tales, and True Tales, told by Virginia Hamilton and illustrated by the Dillons. This is magical, wonderful, and amazing, and unfortunately I think it's out of print. So this is primarily folk tales, fairy tales, and true tales, and there is 1 illustration per story, and these are some of the most glorious illustrations that the Dillons have ever created. I love how when they show people in clothes, it's like these really fancy late 1800s, early 1900s clothes. The stories were varied. There were spooky ones, there were magical ones, there were 2 with mermaids, even though both of them were kind of sad, but still mermaids. And that's why I picked this up, because this was also on the list of Black mermaid stories that I got from Ash from Bookish Realm. It even has a story about the origin of the cat. It was just so wonderful. I loved almost all of these stories, and the illustrations are the cream of the crop of what the Dillons can produce in my mind. So this was wonderful, absolutely highly recommended. I loved it, 5 out of 5 stars, and I need to own my own copy somehow. So those are most of the things that I read in the month of August. Please let me know in the comments down below what your favorite and least favorite thing that you read in the month of August was, and until next time, continue to be lovely.